As mentioned in the state's brief in Zafiro versus the United States, the Supreme Court stated that joint trials play a vital role in the criminal justice system, that they promote efficiency, serve the interest of justice by avoiding the scandal and inequity of inconsistent verdicts. Currently, the defendant's cases are assigned to two different judges. This is highly inefficient, as it requires duplicative work from two judges, their clerks, and their staff. It requires the state to perform duplicative work by creating a need to litigate similar issues twice in front of two different courts. This raises one of the most important issues in front of the court, as in most criminal cases, issues of evidence will be litigated prior to trial in these cases. It's inevitable. The trial court has varying degrees of discretion over the admissibility of evidence. As these cases are currently situated, it's entirely possible that an issue of evidence could be decided upon differently by two different courts. The state believes that could create automatic issues of appeal if that decision is beneficial to one defendant and yet harmful to another defendant.
And welcome to Law and Crime Report, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us. As you can see, we're starting off with Lori Vallow Daybell and Chad Daybell out of Idaho. This is the couple who have been criminally charged and are in jail on charges related to the discovery of the grisly remains of Lori's kids, JJ and Tylee, who were found on Chad's property. Now, previously, we had reported to you that on January 6th, that would be the day that the court would hear arguments regarding a change of venue. But we have since learned that the court is also going to issue a decision on whether to disqualify the man you just saw, the lead prosecutor in this case, Rob Wood. In a closed-door hearing from last week, Chad's attorney, John Pryor, and Lori's attorney, Mark Means, argued that Wood should be kicked off the case for allegedly intimidating Lori's sister, Summer Shiflett, and for having inappropriate discussions about the case with Lori's sister-in-law, Zulema Pastinas. I'm joined right now by crime analyst and former SWAT member Lisa Lockwood. Lisa, I'm glad to have you here. We've talked about this case, and I want to start with one of the weirdest parts about this. It's the idea that Wood and Pryor want this January 6th hearing to be closed. They don't want the public to see it. But Means, who's representing Lori Vallow, wants it open to the public. This is not the first time that we've seen a difference in defense strategies. And you remember when there was a discussion of whether or not Lori and Chad should be tried together? Chad's attorney said no. Mark Means said yes. So what do you make of this difference in terms of whether or not this hearing should be closed or not?
You would not expect that. You would want that. You would think that they would both be on the same side of transparency. So this is a little bit odd, I'm finding right now, that the prosecution actually wants it to be closed versus being public. The contention that we're dealing with right now is the actual interview. And what Rob Wood has said is basically the attorneys were there when he was interviewing Vallow's relatives. So with their attorneys there, how was their intimidation? The attorneys allowed that form of questioning and allowed them to answer certain things. So that to me is odd that Rob Wood wouldn't want that to be exposed publicly.
And let's also talk about the timing for a second, right? They're talking about when they met with him in October in Arizona. If we rewind back to the summer, there were reports that the Arizona police were saying they were going to submit a conspiracy to commit murder charge against Lori Vallow in 4 to 6 months, as early as December. We're in December. And the idea there is to say that she was involved in the killing of her former husband, Charles Vallow, who was gunned down allegedly by Alex Cox, Lori Vallow's deceased brother. So if you think about that, these two people, Summer Shiflett and Zulema Pastinas, who was married to Alex Cox, that they were being interviewed in Arizona. Then Rob Wood goes to Arizona. Then there's this whole conversation of what did he say to them? This is an interesting time. What do you make of it?
It really is. The way the evidence has been unfolding, because it's been a very fluid case trying to get the actual murder charges. And we don't have that right now because we have two people who are not willing, obviously, to take a deal and testify against one another. So until we actually have something concrete to go ahead with the actual murder charges versus conspiracy, which we have right now, our hands are tied as far as what prosecution has. So, as I said before, I feel that it's still very fluid. There still is time for something to happen, and whether or not one of them may later decide to take a plea deal, it's still there. It's still an option.
You know what I don't understand is that it seems law enforcement and the prosecutor's office, they've been keeping everything pretty tight-lipped. You know, we don't know a lot of information. You even look at the autopsy report, the autopsy findings of what happened to Tammy Daybell. This is Chad Daybell's former wife who died seemingly under natural causes, but then it was suspicious circumstances because it was only a few weeks later that he went and then married Lori Vallow. Those results haven't been released. We don't know what's going on in terms of the murder charges. We don't even know the exact cause of death for the two kids. We don't know. We're still trying to guess why neither Chad nor Lori have been charged with murder in relation to Tylee and JJ. There's a lot we don't know yet. The judge is actually allowing people in this case to speak with the media. Some things will be, of course, sealed, but regarding this, this conversation that Summer Shiflett and Zulema Bastinas had with Rob Wood, they can communicate with the media about this if they wanted to. And I find that interesting. The judge is almost allowing more transparency here. Don't you find that strange?
I do, because they're holding their cards close to their chest in some areas, and then some they're being very liberal on what can be disseminated to the media and to the public. So what's the strategy behind that? And I don't know. Why would the judge permit certain things and the prosecution not try to quell some of this stuff from becoming public? And it's a mystery. It really is. I mean, obviously, you want to hold your cards close to your chest because prosecution doesn't want to give up everything to defense in regards to their preparation for it.
And I want to switch gears because I could talk about Lori Vallow all day, but don't have that time. And there's a lot of big stories. And I want to bring our attention to something else. Rebecca Jones, you might have heard of this name. Rebecca Jones, she's the former data analyst from the Department of Health Science. She's a Department of Health scientist, or a former one. And she blew the whistle on the state's alleged attempt to manipulate the coronavirus data as a way to justify lockdown orders. She was this whistleblower. And she has now filed a lawsuit, and it stems from that raid on her house by law enforcement, which was caught on security footage. It went absolutely viral. If you haven't seen it, let's just take a look at this real quick.
Come outside. Outside.
Who else is in the house, ma'am?
My 2 children and my husband.
Where's your husband at?
Calm down. Calm down.
You want the children now?
Calm them all down.
Mr. Jones, come down the stairs. Now!
Police, come down now.
Search warrant.
Bring your
Come down the
children.
stairs.
My children!
Hang on, let me clear the
He
house.
just pointed a gun at my children!
Search warrant.
Now, at the time, authorities were actually responding to a breach of the state health department's emergency messaging system. The IP address was linked back to Jones' home. And in her lawsuit against the officers and the Florida Department of Law Enforcement Commissioner, Jones alleges that that raid was illegal, it was a sham, her constitutional rights were violated, and that this was all a way to punish her for being a whistleblower, for coming forward. So, Lisa, I ask you, that raid, was it a little too extreme, those guns drawn, everything that we saw, and what she's alleging here?
Yeah, I've been on plenty of raids, and the way they decide on how they go about doing actual search warrants varies on the amount of criminal behavior and what they know as far as intel of what could happen inside that house. So this was a knock warrant. They knocked on the door, they announced who they were, and the door was open for them. So it wasn't a dynamic entry where they kicked down the door, stormed in, and took everybody down immediately. But the job of the people serving the warrant, those officers, is safety first. So they need to get in the house, ascertain where everybody is, and make sure that nobody else has weapons that they can potentially use against them. So I don't think that the way they went about knocking on the door, announcing who they are, and brandishing their weapons in a way of looking and scanning through the house, that's all part of training for their safety.
And this was all based upon an IP address, but isn't it true that these IP addresses, if you're trying to hack a system, you could switch that IP address to any location you want? So to base this raid on kind of this data, this IP address, seems to be a bit flimsy, is it not?
Yes, and I would agree with you on that. The manner of which you get a search warrant, obviously it needs to be signed by a judge, and you have to have probable cause, and you have to prove, the reasoning behind it, obviously. So yes, it has been proven that it is the case that IPs can be switched, and somebody can be set up in a sense. But how are you going to know that without actually serving the search warrant? So I think that's why the house wasn't entered in such a dynamic way, where they're kicking down doors and coming through windows and various entry points, et cetera. They realize that there are family members there. When you gather intel for a search warrant, you realize that there will be children on the scene, and you take the necessary precautions for that. And you could hear her scream out, "They're pointing a gun at my child," and that wasn't the case. The officer came to the door, and when you ascend a staircase and go around a staircase, you have to look up the staircase and make sure nobody's up there, and you have your gun drawn in a particular way in order to look at the threat. And there were no children at the top of the stairs.
Lisa, real quick, I want to get your reaction to this. The FDLE commissioner said, as I've said before, I am proud of the professionalism shown by our FDLE agents as they've served a legal search warrant on the residence of Rebecca Jones. Our criminal investigation continues, and while I have not seen this lawsuit, I believe the facts will come out in court. What do you make of that?
I believe it will as well. I mean, they have to show all their cards as far as what is on the actual search warrant. And one of the things that Rebecca alleges later on in a countersuit is a battery, because it's the job of the police to make sure that you don't have a weapon. So they did search her. And when you have a male police officer doing the actual search, they can only go so far. They touched her ribs and they touched her sides. And doing that to look for a weapon, I don't believe is enough to warrant a battery against the police officer.
And look, right now we're going to see if she's ultimately charged with anything, and that's going to ultimately affect her lawsuit. So it's going to be an interesting case to follow. We'll take a break, but when we come back, we have an update for you in the case of a girl who was kidnapped back in the 80s. Stay tuned. Welcome back, everybody. We have a break for you in a kidnapping case that is over 30 years old. 59-year-old David Mish has been charged with murder, the murder of 9-year-old Michaela Garrett, who was grabbed from a parking lot and thrown into a car in 1988. Now, it wasn't until 2018 that investigators were able to match fingerprints from the crime scene to Mish, who's already locked up for murder. Now, to give you even more perspective on this, Michaela, unfortunately, has not been found, and now authorities believe she is dead. So I want to turn right now to Chief Tony Chaplin from the city of Hayward. This was him announcing more of what happened, the breakthrough in this case.
There have been many days that have gone by with no seeming sense of progress or resolution in the case of 9-year-old Michaela Garrett, kidnapped here in Hayward. This is not just another one of those days. Today is about family, community, and healing. We can announce that 59-year-old David Mish has been charged with the murder of Michaela Garrett. He is in custody at Santa Rita Jail here in Alameda County. The disappearance of Michaela Garrett is a tragic story that has gripped the Bay Area for decades. The original investigators who worked tirelessly on this case have been since retired.
Now I want you to listen to the police chief reading a statement from Michaela's mother, Sharon Murch. Think about how long she's been waiting for an answer. Take a look.
I feel as though I am looking for Michaela, but now I don't know where. I honestly feel lost in the dark. Over the years, I have often wondered whether I really wanted to know the truth of what happened to Michaela. I wondered if I would be able to take it. When I received the news of the kidnapper having been identified, I asked the hard questions of Detective Purnell of what method this man used to kill his victims, and received answers, and they were not easy. When I had doubted whether I would want to know, it always come back to, if Michaela could experience it, I could hear it. Because it's not about me. It's never been about me, about my feelings. It has always been about Michaela. What I have been through is nothing. What I feel is not important. It is only about Michaela. The thoughts of her fear, her pain, her grief are overwhelming. Yet, as I told our detective, I am glad that the kidnapper has been identified. I am glad that there are answers. I am glad that this man will never be able to hurt anyone else.
All right, Lisa, clearly this is a big moment. This is a big day. But how did investigators, they still can't find her body. They don't know exactly what happened, but they've made the decision to say that they believe she is dead. How did they come to that conclusion, and what does that tell you exactly what happened to her?
Well, I don't know what happened in the initial interview when they actually went to him and did the fingerprint match and knew that it was him who was involved in the kidnapping and the abduction of her. Because he's already serving time for a murder that took place 1 year after Michaela's kidnapping, and he was implicated in 1986 of a double murder, chances are very good that we know that she's not alive anywhere. We hear of kidnappings where people are put in the house and they live there and end up bearing children and that sort of thing. But they're going to look at what his MO was. And because we already know he's implicated for murder prior to that, and he was charged and sentenced for murder after that, the idea of her not being alive, I think, is pretty concrete at this point.
And that raises a good point, right? It's not like he came out of nowhere. This is a guy who was in the system. This is a guy who committed murder. He was implicated in a double murder, as you just said. Why did it take authorities so long to ultimately, match him to the crime?
This is what irritates me so much, Jesse, because police officers have cold cases, and a lot of times somebody will go back, a new detective who's itchy to make a name for themselves wants to open up these cases and go forward and try and find out what was possibly missed the first time out. Let's look at it again. And we found these cases over and over, DNA matches, et cetera, and coming forward with that. Now we know there are fingerprints that were actually on that scooter. So they had the fingerprints from that case that were sitting there for many years. And to know that in 1989, a year after she was abducted, he was put away for murder, knowing full well that those fingerprints were on file somewhere, but somebody didn't take the time to actually put that case together with this one. And also, too, what other children are possibly missing in other areas that can be pinned back to him that they haven't done fingerprint matches to? So it irritates me that cases can be cold and filed away for so long, and we actually have data that can be resubmitted, and it's not being done. And what is the reasoning behind it? Is it a manpower issue? Are they forgotten about?
Yeah.
You'd not like to think that, but what's the alternative?
And look, and you mentioned the scooter. Just to clarify about this, I mean, it's my understanding she was with a friend. She had left her scooter. It was moved, and it was moved next to this suspect's vehicle. And that when she went to go get her scooter, he grabbed her, and that's what makes this just even so more chilling. But now he's charged with murder. We don't have a body. How is this going to unfold? Because again, he's already locked up. How important is it to prosecute this man for the murder of Michaela? And is it a difficult case when you don't have a body?
It varies by counties and jurisdictions on no body murder charges. What do they do with that? How far can they go through with it? The fact that he's in jail right now, and I don't know the circumstances regarding the murder he was convicted for and he's serving time for a year after Michaela's disappearance. I don't know how much time he has. So how much are they willing to allow him to work that off? Did he get a life sentence? Does he have a possibility of no parole? What benefit do they have that they can kind of dangle over him to say, if you tell us where the body is, we can do this for you? So it's all dependent on that. Does he have any moral compass at all that he wants the family to know, where the child is so they can finally put her to rest the proper way in which they deserve?
It's an answer. It's just, as you heard from that statement from Michaela's mother, it's just not the answer that they were hoping for after all these years, but it is something. So it's just a tragic case. Let's switch gears because there's another big breakthrough legal development that we have to talk about. A class action lawsuit has been filed on behalf of over 40 migrant women who claim that a Georgia immigration center abused them. So the suit alleges that women were quote, subjected to non-consensual, medically unindicated and or invasive gynecological procedures. It goes on to say that when these women tried to speak up, they were physically assaulted and threatened with everything from solitary confinement to separation. The lawsuit is seeking emergency action, compensation, potential release of these migrant women. The DOJ, the IG from the Department of Homeland Security have launched probes into the matter. And just to give you a little sense of this, a little background, a nurse whistleblower back in September brought the story to everyone's attention. So let's just take a look at that real quick.
you will have detained women. I had several detained women on numerous occasions that would come to me and say, Miss Wooten, I had a hysterectomy. Why? I had no answers as to why they had those procedures. And one lady walked up to me here this last time around between October of 19 until July the 2nd. And she said, what is he? Is he the uterus collector? Does he collect uteruses? And I asked her, what does she mean? And she says, everybody that I talked to has had a hysterectomy.
Lisa, this is crazy. This is something, I mean, what do you make of these allegations here? Because this is very disturbing.
It is, and it's something that needs to be delved into very deeply, because you have to look at the quantity of women that were there and the service that they received, the actual procedures that they've received, what warranted those procedures, what were the ages of these women. I mean, I never heard of hysterectomies being done for life-saving reasons. So what would be the purpose of this, and why is it exclusively to this particular doctor? So I think they're going to be able to have the evidence to find out how many women did this doctor actually see, and out of that quantity of women, what were their prior medical conditions, and then go ahead and looking at, was this necessary? The other allegation that the whistleblower, Dawn Wooten, had said is that a lot of times they were signing documents and they didn't have interpreters there. So that's another huge issue. They're submitting to having surgeries and not really knowing what the surgery is because they didn't have the actual Spanish, English interpreters for them. So if that's the case, again, we have an incredible abuse on top of them not being properly notified and then getting procedures, obviously, that were not warranted.
The Department of Justice, as I said, the Department of Justice and the Inspector General from the Department of Homeland Security have launched their own investigations. How does that work exactly? What are they looking for? Do they interact at all? Are they looking for separate things? And how is that going to unfold?
Sure. So they do need to have their separate investigation. And it's not only going to be in the Georgia ICE detention center, it's going to be across the entire nation. What procedures are being done? And then they can look at a ratio of how many hysterectomies were done in Texas, how many were done in all of the other bordering agencies where we have the ICE detention centers, what kind of procedures were done, and what was the reasoning behind it. And if they see a concentration in Georgia with this one particular doctor, obviously this is a heinous abuse of taking away these women's rights to have children in the future. So it needs to be done, and it needs to be done across the entire nation.
I had read that one part of the lawsuit was the release of these women. Does that mean they're released into another center, or are they released? I mean, how would that operate exactly?
Right. So one of the allegations with the prevention of them actually trying to get this lawsuit together is that ICE was separating these women so they couldn't conspire together and talk and compare stories, et cetera. And if that's the case, obviously, it's another abuse of power. So releasing them, I don't know if that means it's actually releasing them and having them become American citizens and en route to do that, or getting them into another place that's more secure in order for them to feel safe as they go forward with the lawsuit.
And not to get too political, but one of the other aspects of this, what they're asking for is for the Biden administration to make changes that were instituted by the Trump administration. Is that the fault of the higher ups? Or is this more, if this is all true, is this an individual incident? Is this something on the ground level? I mean, what do you think?
Well, we're going to find out when there's an actual investigation through the other states, if this was isolated to that particular region, and if other nurses or whistleblowers come forward in other areas to say, yes, we are seeing an increasing number of these gynecological procedures and hysterectomies that are not warranted, et cetera. And that's going to come out in the investigation if that's an actual abuse that's going countrywide. So I think that it's something that needs to be looked at. Without a doubt, interpreters need to be there to make sure that when they're signing off to go ahead with these surgeries, that they know exactly what they're getting into.
Yeah, sure. Well, now clearly they have a voice and they're being heard. There's investigations that are being launched. we'll see which way this goes. It's just an absolutely incredible story. But look, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the Pike County murders out of Ohio, and as well as an update in the case of a teenager accused of running over a librarian. We'll be right back right after this. All right, over now to Ohio and the brutal killing of 8 members of the Roden family in 2016. One of the defendants, Edward Jake Wagner, was in court yesterday, and Wagner, along with his parents and brother, have been charged with murder. The killing seems to have been started by a possible custody dispute between Wagner and Hannah Roden, who he had been in a relationship with, and it was over their daughter. There was a lot that happened in this hearing, and I just want to play some portions of it. Take a look.
We so stipulated and had a chance to run this by Mr. Wagner, so we're all in agreement that we stipulate to those facts.
I thought there was something also, or there was something else you were saying.
Yes, Your Honor. So the second stipulation that we would put forth is that Mr. Wilson serves in a policy-making role for Governor DeWine. He has since placed a wall up between him and any policy issues regarding the State Public Defender's Office. That has been completely relinquished, and the individual that now is handling those issues, Mr. Wilson does not maintain any supervisory capacity over him, and so he is completely out of that equation.
As discussed in chambers, we would stipulate to that. I must admit, just here now in court, I'm wondering if there's any additional facts descriptive of whether Mr. Wilson, notwithstanding this wall between folks in the governor's office who do the things we described in our motion relative to the Ohio Public Defender's Office, right, without repeating all of that. I would wonder, though, whether Mr. Wilson retains a responsibility, or at least an expectation, that he personally will keep the governor updated on all of these proceedings. Because, you know, ultimately the governor will have that final authority as we described in our original motion.
Are you talking about these proceedings?
Yeah, about this
prosecution,
about the prosecution of Jake Wagner, whether the governor is maintaining a personal interest in it now in his role as governor.
And that actually concerned Andy Wilson, who there's a whole big objection to whether or not he should serve as a special prosecutor in this case, given the fact that he's the advisor to the governor. I'm going to get into that in 1 second. But Lisa, let's just take a step back here. You have a brutal set of killings where you have so many different victims, so many different defendants. What is your perspective on this crime?
I can't even imagine what that was like for the police officers who arrived on that scene to see an entire family, 8 people executed, you know, what that looked like, and then going forward to collect all of the evidence that's involved in that. And then where we are right now as far as who they believe is the trigger man, and family members, parents, grandparents who are all part and parcel to putting this entire death plot together for this entire family over custody of a child. It's just sickening. So, you know, the aspect right now, what they're discussing, one of the things I saw earlier was the rights of the actual suppressor that was used, because we know that a gun was fired and a suppressor was used. And as far as the evidence that they were able to get with the suppressor wasn't transferred over to Wagner's attorney, and why wasn't it? So there's still a lot of evidence that is coming forward that has not been handed over. So that's why they're looking for a continuance to put this out a little bit further.
And let me get your perspective on this. Andy Wilson, he's an advisor to the governor. There was an objection. The defense attorneys were objecting to him serving as a special prosecutor. And they said it wouldn't be fair because he could, you know, be in constant contact with Governor DeWine, and he could direct him on policy issues. Wilson has argued that, you know, he's not having these regular conversations with the governor about the case. He's maybe talking to him about certain dates, but he's not going to have a substantive discussion with him about this. Do you think it's appropriate for someone who is connected to the governor in this way to be a special prosecutor in this case, which I have to imagine if you're in Ohio, it is just taking the news waves. This is a horrible, horrible massacre.
Yes, and if there's any indication of bias, I think the defense attorney did the right thing as far as saying that there is potential, as you said, for a particular influencing policy change regarding the case, the power that he has in it. Defense attorney would be remiss in their duties if they didn't put that out as a potential bias opportunity against the defendant.
And look, there were a few things that happened in this hearing, including the fact that the judge, advised the defendant of his right to a speedy trial, a constitutional right, but he also has the right to waive a speedy trial. Let's hear how that played out.
The thing we wish to discuss in view of the fact that we are anticipating a trial date being set and a motion hearing being set, was a speedy trial issue. You wish to address that?
Your Honor, we have been given a written waiver of speedy trial form, the same one that we have filed before. Mr. Myers and I have gone over this with Mr. Wagner. We've discussed both his statutory as well as his constitutional rights to speedy trial. We've discussed with him the fact that he had previously extended his waiver to January 30th of next year. And he has executed a written waiver of speedy trial to be effective from January 31 of 2021 through October 1 of 2021. And Mr. Myers and I have witnessed Mr. Wagner's signature.
Mr. Wagner, do you feel that you've had an adequate opportunity to discuss your right of speedy trial with your attorneys here?
Yes, sir.
And you feel that you understand your right of speedy trial?
Yes, Your Honor.
And of course, if the court did not afford you a speedy trial and the charges would have to be dismissed and could not later be brought, you also understand that, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that if you waive your right of speedy trial, then the court can set a trial beyond any speedy trial times that would otherwise apply. You also understand that?
Yes.
And do you wish to waive your right of speedy trial as stated on this document through October 1, 2021?
I did, Your Honor.
And did you sign this document?
I did, Your Honor.
And did you understand?
Yes.
The court will approve the defendant's waiver of the right to speedy trial through October 1, 2021. Do you feel that Mr. Wagner, that you're having an adequate opportunity to work with your attorneys and to have access and contact with them?
Yes, Your Honor.
Are you satisfied with the services that your attorneys are providing?
Very.
Do you have any complaints at all about the process?
I'm sorry.
Do you have any complaints at all about the process and about how you're being treated and dealt with in the case?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, Lisa, let's talk about this. We know that a defendant has a right to a speedy trial. Sometimes it's an advantage if you ultimately want to push the prosecution to try a case pretty soon, keep them on their toes. Maybe they get them to go to trial when they're not fully ready. But a lot of times what we see is what we just saw here, where a defendant will waive their right to a speedy trial. Maybe it gives the defense more time to prepare, and that's on a case-by-case basis. Are you surprised that he waived his right to a speedy trial up until October 2021 or not?
I'm not. It's such a brutal massacre, and there's so many moving parts, so many people involved, his brother, his parents, grandparents, and they need that time to continue to collect evidence and think about how they're going to combat everything that the prosecution has. So they probably explained it to him or sold it to him. Listen, you have potential of being in jail with other family members for the rest of your life. So if you sit in jail right now as we go through this for another year and allow us to put the best case possible together, wouldn't it be worth it? And I would imagine he would say, yes, absolutely, sign me on. Do whatever you can to make sure that I'm not convicted of this.
That's not even the worst outcome for him, because since he's charged with aggravated murder, he could face the death penalty. What's the likelihood, if this does become a case where it goes to trial and the death penalty is on the table, that a jury, let's say, convicts him, that they would ultimately opt in favor of the death penalty? Does this case meet the criteria of capital punishment.
Yes, and we're going to see that when we start to find out who the players were, who the actual executor was, who was the person who put the plot together, and all of them may be getting different sentences based on the exact role. But a lot of times we know that they also can potentially all get the actual same conviction against them, as we have seen with bank robbers and the getaway car, et cetera. So it's a scary case for all the members of that family, no question about it, because we have 8 people they've taken out entire family, completely massacred. And we know that this was a bitter custody battle, and this thing turned so sour and so horrendously ugly that I think they're going to use all the time that they need between now and next October to get what they can to try to get them off of it.
And let me ask you about that, because we know that there were several weapons here, I believe 3 murder weapons. One of the weapons, a Walther Colt 1911 .22 pistol that was recovered. They believe that was the type that the defendant Jake Wagner had owned. But you look at this crime scene where multiple people are shot. Now you have multiple people involved. Is it easy for investigators to definitively say who fired which weapon, who killed who? Because, like you said, this really does seem to concern mostly Jake, considering the custody dispute, but does that necessarily make him the person who killed all those people? So I'm curious, from your point of view, from the investigator's point of view, how easy is it to ultimately determine what happened in this crime scene?
Sure, we have 8 people. We have various weapons. We know that these weapons hold different amounts of bullets in the various cartridges. So if you have 8 people and the intention was to, fire away into each victim to ensure that they were dead and emptying the entire cartridges and magazines that were used in those weapons, and potentially one person could have done that. But taking out 8 people, I believe, is a communal effort. And having those 3 weapons there and having evidence with those 3 weapons and showing the different ways that the people were killed, a lot of times you can see that obviously the trajectory of the bullets, where people were standing, et cetera, and what other evidence that they actually found on that crime scene, that they can pin it on multiple people instead of just one.
Like I said, it's a huge case in Ohio, but we're all following it across the country, the Pike County massacre. And really just unbelievably brutal crime. We'll take a break. When we come back, one big story that we want to finish up on, we've talked about it before. It's about these teenagers involved in the killing of a librarian, a mother who was seemingly trying to protect her son. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. The teens who have been allegedly involved in the death of a Florida librarian have officially been indicted. Let's go through it. So 18-year-old Elijah Stanzel faces first-degree murder. His girlfriend, 16-year-old Kimberly Stone, and 2 others, including 16-year-old Raven Sutton and 14-year-old Hannah Eubank, they're charged with burglary with assault, accessory after the fact, and attempted felony murder. Now, this all comes after apparently the teens went to confront Stone's ex-boyfriend at his house. Stanzel allegedly attacked him. The ex-boyfriend's mother, Suzette Penton, intervened to try to protect her son, and she was allegedly run over by Stanzel. There was evidence to suggest he could have gone a different way, but he just ran her over, showing intent there. And Stanzel, believe it or not, is the son of a pastor. Now, here's the sheriff describing more of the attack, because this is absolutely heinous.
When he comes out the side door, Elijah immediately confronts him in the carport and starts beating him up, where a fight ensues. We see that Hunter tried to, or either was forced back into the house as a result of the fight. Elijah is fighting with Hunter. Raven gets a couple of shots in during the fight, the best we can tell with the pieces of video we have. And Hannah is taking photographs or video in this. About that time, unexpectedly, Suzette comes back. She arrives. When she comes back, we see that our ringleader here along with the other two, just kind of hurry off back to their van. Suzette actually sees the fight. She gets out and goes to the van in her car. Suzette is trying to take photographs of the getaway van. Elijah Standstill, runs over her, completely over her. She has tire tracks on her body where he runs totally over her. As we speak today, Detective Fulcher from our homicide team is on his way to the South County Jail where he's still locked up to charge him with murder.
Lisa, it seems that police know a lot of the story and a lot of the details. How much of that is based upon what the witnesses said, what maybe these defendants have said, or how much is it just based upon the physical evidence?
Yeah, all of that came together. And also the son who was actually battered on the scene, who witnessed what happened. The dream for any police investigator is to try and find who did this. And she did exactly what anybody would have loved to have had happen, is to take a photograph, try to identify the suspects, and get a picture of the license plate. So here she was trying to protect her son, saw them fighting with her son, immediately ran out there in order to get that evidence, stood in front of the vehicle in possibly an attempt to stop them, but taking photographs. And it appears that he just blatantly ran her over in order to flee the scene. So I think the compilation of all of it, yes, certainly they talked to everybody involved, the passengers in the vehicle, why they were there. They looked at text messages prior to that, making sure that he was home in order to receive what became a battery and then burglary. It was enhanced because they actually pushed him inside of his home and they weren't permitted to be in the home. So I think it was a compilation of all of those things, Jesse.
You have two 16-year-olds and a 14-year-old that are to be tried as adults. Is that the right decision here?
I don't think so. We know the 14-year-old, the sheriff who actually said, she was there. She wasn't the one taking photographs. Yes, she was there and she was part of it. The idea of somebody that age being influenced by the older kids, I believe that she should not be tried as an adult, but I don't know everything as far as her role in all of this because I'm not privy to that information. And then the other 16-year-olds, they were part and parcel to it. We have somebody who's out there actively taking photographs and video of the incident. She was the reason behind all of this. That was her ex-boyfriend that was there. And it was her boyfriend who decided that he was going to go there and beat him up. And they were going to document it. And then God only knows what they were going to do with that documentation had it not been for the mother who actually showed up and tried to prevent it.
What's really sad is Suzette didn't die immediately. She was almost on life support, and she ultimately succumbed to her injuries. That's really, really sad and tragic when you think about this. But what do they all face here, Lisa? I mean, they're all facing serious charges. Clearly, Elijah faces the most serious of charges. He's 18 years old. How is this case going to unfold for all of them, and what are you looking out for next?
Right. So I don't believe the police have enough evidence to charge the other individuals in the car for the attempted murder initially and then murder because they weren't behind the wheel of it. What could they possibly have done to prevent that, that immediate impulsive act of the driver? So this may be one of those cases where it ends up being a slap on the wrist for the other two involved, maybe not the ex-girlfriend, but the other two that were there and kind of part of the ride-along. But this is going to affect, obviously, the rest of their lives, having something like this on their record. We know with a juvenile, that's not seen going forward, but all of them being charged as adults, this is potentially life-ruining for all of them. And should it be? I think for some, yes. For others, maybe not.
What's just so tragic about this is it started out as a beef because of a relationship gone bad, and look what it turned into. A son lost his mother who was trying to intervene and stop this from going on. That's what's so sad about this. And, you know, we'll see where it goes. Lisa, appreciate you taking the time. You were fantastic. Everyone out there, thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time. Stay safe.